Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the muddied wooden bowels of an Elizabethan playhouse, somewhere just behind the makeshift curtain, where the scent of sweat, wet wool, stale ale, and citrus hangs thick in the air. You're in full costume, your hose are itchy, your ruffs lopsided, and you can already hear the muffled shouts of the crowd gathering outside. This is the Globe Theatre, and you're not just an actor, you're a potential target. Why? Because in the unruly days of English Renaissance drama, the most dangerous critic wasn't armed with a quill or even a scowl. No, the real threat came from someone standing ankle-deep in mud, gripping a half-peeled orange with suspicious intent. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far-flung or unusually cozy, leave your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floorboards creak underfoot. You tug your cap tighter, hoping it hides the sweat already threatening to trickle down your temple. This is your 5th performance of the week, and your lines still feel like half-chewed bread in your mouth. You whisper a quick prayer to Saint Genesius. Yes, even in Protestant England, old habits die hard, and peek through the curtain. The crowd's thick tonight. Hundreds of faces, from powdered nobles leaning over the balcony rails to grimy commoners shoulder to shoulder in the pit. And it's that pit that makes your stomach clench. They're loud already, not angry, just ready. You spot at least 4 orange vendors weaving through the crowd, baskets on hips yelling, "Sweetest Valencias, 3 a farthing." You try not to take it personally that they always seem busiest before your scenes. The orange wasn't always a weapon. Imported from Seville or Lisbon, it was a luxury, something sweet, juicy, and vaguely exotic in a country more famous for damp bread and salted herring. But the Elizabethans were a pragmatic bunch. If they were going to pay a penny to stand in the pit for 3 hours without a seat or a roof, they wanted some say in the show. And nothing says feedback quite like a high-velocity citrus to the chest. Historians still argue whether this practice was as common as folklore suggests. Some claim the cost of an orange, while cheaper than a front-row seat, was still too high for the average ale-drenched groundling. Others point to accounts of fruit peddlers making a tidy profit at performances and oranges being strewn across the stage like botanical confetti. But you don't need a scholarly consensus to believe it. You just remember last Tuesday's matinee when poor Thomas was halfway through "Oh, for a Muse of Fire" and got pelted with something soft and suspiciously sticky. It took him a full line and a half to recover. He turned it into a limp, impromptu death scene. The crowd cheered. Backstage, the rules are simple. Don't flub your lines, don't trip on the trap door, and never turn your back on the pit. They're close enough to smell, frankly, and close enough to hit you with whatever's in their hands. The manager, old Master Henslow, tries to lay down rules. No throwing, no heckling, no peeing in the pit. But the reality is, you can't police hundreds of boisterous, ale-sloshing Londoners packed into a wooden O when the lead actor just forgot half of Act 2. Still, there's an unspoken understanding between actor and audience. It's a gamble. They want to be moved. They want drama, blood, poetry, and maybe a pratfall. And if you fail to deliver, well, let's just say your doublet better not be white. You catch your cue. The flute squeaks its shaky tune. You stride out, boots squelching slightly from yesterday's rain. Your voice carries. What light through yonder window breaks? So far, so good. Until someone in the pit finishes your line. It's Juliet, and she wants her farthing back. Laughter erupts. You keep going. You don't flinch. But you do see the orange, raised casually in the air like a priest offering communion. You say your next line anyway. You press on, pretending not to see it. The orange, that is. It's still up, hovering just above the heads of a dozen laughing groundlings, the skin half-peeled, its pulp glinting wetly in the light. Your pulse quickens, but your gait stays measured. That's the trick. Show fear, and you're inviting an ambush. Show poise, and maybe they'll lower their arms and settle for heckling instead. But then again, this is London in the late 1590s, and you, poor player that struts and frets upon this wooden stage, are part of a precarious social contract. The pit, also called the yard, is the realm of the groundlings. These are not your dainty, decor-minded nobles. These are dock workers, blacksmiths, alewives, chimney sweeps, butchers' apprentices, all crammed together, often unwashed and highly expressive. Their tickets cost a penny, but their expectations could be lethal to your pride and your laundry. If they liked a scene, they clapped and roared. If they didn't, well, you've seen actors heckled so thoroughly they left the stage and sobbed behind the props table. You've heard jeers that would curl a bishop's wig. But the oranges, those were next level. Historians still debate how often fruit flinging truly occurred. Diaries from the period mention the presence of fruit sellers, and satirical plays sometimes joke about actors dodging food mid-monologue. But we lack a definitive eyewitness account stating, "I did verily been a bad Romeo with an orange." Still, the oral tradition, and more than one bruised ego, suggests the crowd had a particular flair for edible critique. Now, here's the quirk. Groundlings didn't throw oranges because they were angry. No, they did it because they cared. It was part sport, part theater, and part odd tradition, like tomatoes at vaudeville centuries later. If the actor was especially pompous, or if the line delivery fell flat, an orange was less of an attack and more of a note. And let's not forget, oranges weren't cheap. Imported from Spain or Portugal, they arrived in London by ship, usually nestled among spices and silks. But by the late 1500s, they were just affordable enough for the working class to splurge on, particularly if it meant participating in the drama. That's the unspoken rule of Elizabethan theater. Everyone's part of the show. So when that orange finally does fly, it's not a surprise. It arcs with a little wobble, lands just shy of your boot, and explodes into a gentle splatter on the floorboards. The crowd hoots with delight. You, ever the professional, barely blink. You even ad-libbed, "Lo, the sun rises, right beneath my foot." The crowd roars louder. Offstage, someone's clapping. Probably Will Kemp. That cheeky rogue loves it when you improvise. But the orange isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Because now they've been invited to play. They know you'll respond. You've become a character they can poke, provoke, and prod. Just like the fools or jesters or romantic leads on stage. You've become real. And in the theater of the people, being real is everything. From the corner of your eye, you spot two more oranges being passed through the crowd like contraband. The audience isn't a sea of faces anymore. It's a jungle of possibility. A handkerchief raised too suddenly could hide a fruit. A sneeze could precede a launch. And yet, in the chaos, something beautiful happens. Your performance sharpens. That's the real power of the orange threat. It focuses you. Every line matters now. Every beat, every breath, every gesture must win them over. Keep them laughing, swooning, sobbing, because if you don't, well, you already know how the audience tips the scales. Historians still argue whether the groundlings' unruliness harmed or helped Elizabethan drama. Some say it fostered a raw, unpredictable energy that gave birth to genius. Others argue it reduced the bard's finest soliloquies to slapstick. But most agree it made the theatre alive. And in this moment, your doublet clinging with sweat, your calves tensed for evasive footwork, the crowd leaning closer for your next breath, you feel it too. You're not just an actor, you're prey, priest, poet, and player all at once. And somewhere beneath the boards, an orange seed rolls into the dark. You can feel the pulp sticking to your boot. It's already soaked through the seam of the leather, faintly sweet and a little sour, and worse, it's slippery. You shuffle your next step, careful not to lose footing, not because you're worried about falling, but because a stumble here, in front of the groundlings, would be its own kind of curtain call. Welcome to the real performance hazard, citrus sabotage. Tonight, you're not just remembering lines, modulating breath, and projecting to the rafters. You're also dodging peels and navigating a stage transformed into a treacherous, juice-slick minefield. Actors of the time were no strangers to improvised danger. Sword fights? Sure. Hidden trapdoors? Of course. Unstable set pieces made by the carpenter's half-drunk cousin? Naturally. But the orange was both tool and torment. It was cheap enough to fling, juicy enough to splatter, and heavy enough to make a point. Some actors, especially those prone to flubbing lines, develop citrus sense, an uncanny awareness of a fruit about to fly. You scan the audience without moving your head, watching for the telltale toss, the coiled arm, the smug expression of someone who thinks they have timing. Historians still argue whether oranges were more common than, say, apples or overripe plums. The consensus leans toward oranges, in part due to the rise of the orange girl vendors, young women who sold them to eager crowds, often with theatrical flair of their own. But there's no denying the splatter factor gave oranges the edge. What's worse is that you can't clean up the mess. Once the first fruit lands, the stage becomes a kind of fruit graveyard. Pulp clings to velvet cloaks, peels hide beneath props. You've seen dancers slip during a jig and land flat on their backs, their limbs flailing like marionettes cut loose. Even fight scenes became impromptu slapstick. You remember one duel in Henry IV, when the villain attempted a dramatic spin and launched a citrus peel clear into the front row. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, but he limped for days afterward. Still, you carry on. Tonight's scene is a tender one. You're playing a lovesick sailor, penning a poem to a girl who doesn't know your name. You perch on a wooden crate meant to suggest a ship's deck. The lights flicker behind stained glass shutters. You speak softly, almost a whisper, and that's when it happens. Not a throw, no, this is more insidious. Someone rolls an orange? It comes from stage right, a slow, steady spin across the floorboards, almost thoughtful. You glance at it mid-line, then return your gaze to the imaginary horizon. The audience holds its breath. Will you acknowledge it? Pick it up? Incorporate it? You don't. You just shift your foot, let the orange nudge your heel, and keep reciting your poem. Laughter bubbles up. You've passed the test. For now. There's a rhythm to this, a game you learn to play with experience. New actors try to win the crowd with volume and bravado. Veterans know better. You win them with respect, not reverence, heavens no. The pit hates groveling. But if you act like they're in on the joke, if you let them feel like part of the scene, they'll go from saboteur. Still, you never let your guard down. The fear of being pelted doesn't vanish, it just evolves. It becomes part of the stagecraft. You learn to glance subtly downward, to sweep your long sleeves toward trouble spots, to shift your blocking slightly if you see a suspicious gleam in the shadows. The show continues. You rise from the crate. The stagehand lifts the painted sail behind you. Your final monologue begins. You pause, hold the silence, and from the pit comes a voice. Watch your step, sailor. You nod just once, then you say the last line. For love may leave a man adrift, but citrus leaves him bruised. The crowd erupts. Even the orange vendors are laughing now. The laughter lingers like a fog, rising and curling under the eaves of the thatched roof. You step backstage, careful to avoid the growing orchard of peels and splatters now dotting the stage. Someone hands you a cloth, more of a suggestion than a solution, and you dab gently at the sticky patch just above your knee. The orange was a hazard, sure, but tonight it became part of the act. Not every evening ends so well. You plop onto a rickety bench near the prop trunk. Around you the troupe is abuzz. One actor adjusts his powdered wig for the next scene. Another tries to scrub juice from his cuffs with a stale heel of bread. It's chaos, yes, but it's your kind of chaos. You glance out toward the pit again. It's still heaving with bodies, arms waving in the torchlight, laughter rising in uneven gusts. Among them, weaving gracefully between beer-stained breeches and tightly corseted skirts, are the orange sellers, baskets in hand, coin purses jingling. Business, as always, is good. By the late 1500s, these fruit vendors had become part of the London theatre landscape. Most were young women, bold, quick-tongued, and more than capable of holding their own in a shouting match with a drunkard. They weren't just peddling citrus, they were selling experience. A piece of the show, a tool of revenge, a prop of potential. Historians still argue about their status. Were they independent entrepreneurs, low-ranking theater staff, part-time actresses, or even courtesans on the side? Records are spotty and names are few, but one thing's clear, they were formidable. You remember Agnes sharp-eyed, sharp-elbowed and quick with a grin. She once told you, "If I sell 2 oranges, I've fed my baby. If I sell 4, I buy myself a pint. If I sell 6, some poor fool's about to get drenched." Then she'd wink and vanish into the crowd. There was a rhythm to it. She'd shout from the gallery, "Fresh oranges, peel 'em for your sweetheart or chuck 'em at the swine." The audience roared every time. You'd think management would crack down on it. Fruit throwing damages costumes, distracts actors, stains the planks. But the truth? They tolerated it, encouraged it even. Why? Because oranges sold tickets. A crowd that could laugh, shout, and participate was a crowd that returned. Word of mouth mattered, and you should have seen what happened at the Globe yesterday was the Elizabethan version of going viral. Some theaters even hired vendors directly, splitting profits and placing them in key areas for maximum temptation. After all, an orange in the hand is worth 2 in the basket if it ends up in Act 3 with a perfectly timed splat. And let's not forget the orange was never just about bad acting. Sometimes it was a signal, thrown with affection, not anger. a playful jab at an actor's favorite line, a gift lobbed toward a popular jester, in rare cases even a flirtation. You once caught an orange mid-air and saw a tiny ribbon tied to the stem. The girl who tossed it, she winked. You flubbed your next 5 lines. Still, the fruit had its risks. That time, an audience member slipped on a peel and cracked his elbow. Lawsuit. Another time, the Duke of Norfolk's cousin was struck in the chest mid-monologue. That ended in a duel challenge backstage, though fortunately, cooler heads and a well-timed goblet of claret prevailed. But perhaps the strangest fallout? A quiet superstition began to grow among the actors. You hear it whispered sometimes, especially among the apprentices, never rehearse a romantic scene with an orange on stage. It's bad luck. Means your partner might fall in love with the crowd instead of you. Tonight, though, you got lucky. No bruises, no slips. Just one rogue orange and a crowd eating out of your hand, even if that hand is now sticky. You rise, dust yourself off, and return to the wings. Another scene beckons, another round of cheers or jeers. And in the shadows, a vendor's voice calls out, 2 for a penny, 1 for love, 1 for revenge. You smile. The show must go on. You return to your mark, the stage floor faintly tacky underfoot. There's a squelch beneath your heel that wasn't there before. Someone must have stepped on the earlier orange and spread it like marmalade across the floorboards. But you don't pause. The music's begun, a thin melody squeaking from a recorder somewhere offstage. Time for the mask. You adjust your cape, pull your posture upright, and waltz forward with a grace that would make your old fencing master proud, if he weren't currently asleep in the back row. No matter. The scene demands elegance. You provide it, or at least try to. Then your foot catches something. It's not a peel exactly, more like a half-pulped fruit flattened into the wood grain. You recover with a tight pirouette that almost looks intentional. The audience cheers, you bow slightly, crisis dodged. For now. It's easy to forget that these wooden stages, raised above the yard, open to the elements, weren't exactly built for cleanliness. With no roof over the pit and only the wealthier patrons shielded by galleries, the theater was often soaked, wind-blown, and streaked with every kind of debris the London air could hurl at it. Add in food, drink, and flung fruit, and the stage becomes a culinary obstacle course. Today it's oranges, last week it was meat pies. Once, in a particularly heated performance of Taming of the Shrew, someone flung a pickled egg. It hit the prompter's book. The rest of the scene had to be invented on the spot. Historians still argue whether the danger of slipping was exaggerated by later writers, eager to romanticize the rough magic of Elizabethan theater. But even if only half the tales are true, the stage was no place for careless footing. You've seen actors stumble mid-soliloquy and land in ways both hilarious and horrifying. A fall during a comic scene, gold. A fall during the death of Caesar, less ideal. Theatrics only carry you so far when your back is spasming and your co-star is trying not to laugh. Backstage, there are tricks. Some actors scuff their souls with ash to create traction. Others request sand to be scattered on known juice zones. You once saw a costume sewn with tiny nails in the toe to help grip the boards. It worked, until the actor kicked a prop barrel and sparked. But no matter how careful you are, there's always the chance of surprise. Tonight's scene involves a dance, light footwork, gliding steps, 2 pairs of lovers pretending to be masked nobles at court. You link arms with your partner, Marjorie, whose timing is impeccable, and whose feet have never once betrayed her. You sweep in a slow arc, pivoting together, and for a moment it's magic, then squish. You both feel it, you both freeze, and then, miracle of miracles, she laughs. A tiny, almost inaudible snort that breaks character just long enough to turn a misstep into a moment. The crowd picks up on it and chuckles with you. You continue the dance, a little more bouncy now, as though the slip were choreographed. That's the thing about Elizabethan theater. It breathes, it adapts, it forgives. If you're clever enough to spin your mistakes into charm, the scene ends with a bow. Applause erupts. Someone shouts, "Encore the squish!" You and Marjorie exit, hands slick with sweat and stage glue, and lean against a painted pillar to catch your breath. There's citrus on your boot and poetry still in the air. You've survived the soggy stage once again. And the night is far from over. You peel the orange peel off your boot with a sigh that smells faintly of marmalade. Marjorie's already backstage, dabbing her slippers with a rag and muttering under her breath about ruined souls and unpaid costume repairs. You offer a shrug and a grin. She tosses the rag at you, which you mostly catch. A costumer walks by, groaning at the state of your once elegant cloak. You glance down. A faint arc of juice stains now curves across the hem like a comet tail. Velvet was never meant to meet Valencia. Elizabethan stage costumes were nothing short of theatrical miracles, ornate, often second-hand from actual nobles, and patched together with dreams and threadbare ambition. The theater companies, even the big ones, couldn't afford to commission entirely new wardrobes for every play. Instead, they bought used clothing from gentry or pieced together outfits from market stalls, funeral leftovers, and hand-me-downs from disgraced courtiers. Historians still debate whether certain iconic roles, Hamlet, Falstaff, Lady Macbeth, were tied to specific garments passed from one actor to the next, carrying the spirit and citrus stains of every soul who wore them. But here's what they agree on. Costumes were expensive, and the actors, more often than not, paid for them themselves. That's right, you're a performer and a financial investor in your own trousers. A good doublet might cost you 2 months of wages. A ruff? Don't even ask. And those ridiculously puffed sleeves? They could bankrupt a lesser man. So when an orange hits you mid-scene, it's not just an affront to your dignity. It's an economic disaster. Tonight's damage isn't too bad, a faint splash on your shoulder and some pulp under the collar, but you've seen worse. You remember Richard, poor lad, who got doused during a storm scene and had to wear a moldy, lemon-tinged jerkin for 2 weeks because the wardrobe mistress refused to clean it twice. The older actors had tricks to defend their finery. A light oil rubbed into the fabric made fruit less likely to stick. A stiffened inner lining might absorb the first strike. Some even trained their cloaks to swirl in a way that deflected airborne missiles. A kind of citrus tai chi. You, being younger and poorer, rely mostly on reflexes and blind luck. You head to the costume bench and find your backup cloak. It smells faintly of camphor and regret, but is mercifully dry. As you change, you hear it, that sudden, unmistakable splut of another orange striking wood. A smattering of laughter follows. You wince. This time it's Simon, the company's newest apprentice. He's halfway through a monologue about love and springtime. The orange catches him square on the hip, and his gasp is louder than the crowd's laughter. He stops speaking. A rookie mistake. You watch from the wings as he blinks into the pit, unsure what to do. The audience begins to murmur. Then, to your surprise, He stoops down, picks up the orange, sniffs it with exaggerated disgust, and hurls it off stage like a javelin. The crowd erupts. You grinned. Well done, Simon. Later you'll pat his shoulder and tell him the truth. It's not about not getting hit. It's about turning the hit into something they'll remember. That's what your cloak is for. That's what your sleeves are for. That's what the stains and repairs and sticky hems mean. Is they mean you were here, you performed, you survived. Because in the Globe Theatre, dodging criticism is only half the job. The other half? Wearing it with style. You're still chuckling at Simon's improvisation when you hear the familiar rustle of silk behind you. That can only mean one thing. The critics have arrived. They've been sitting up in the balconies all along, sipping wine from pewter cups and scrawling hasty notes into leather-bound notebooks. They don't throw oranges, too genteel for that, but their words can be just as sticky, worse perhaps. A critic's review can haunt you for months. A groundling's fruit, that just ruins your socks. You steal a glance upward. The balcony's candlelight glints off velvet sleeves and ink-stained fingers. One man has his spectacles perched low on his nose and is frowning, as if the play's very existence is an affront to Shakespearean meter. Still, you'd rather deal with him than the pit, because critics, for all their grumbling and jaded sighs, live in a world of words. They'll call your accent grating, your timing ponderous, your pathos mechanical, but they won't coat you in juice. They strike on paper, not in pulp. Historians still argue about the reach of theatrical criticism in the Elizabethan era. While printed play reviews weren't as widespread as in later centuries, word-of-mouth critiques held enormous weight. Pamphlets circulated, gossip traveled faster than a plague cart, and if a prominent gentleman declared your tragedy a farce in breeches, your bookings for the next month might mysteriously vanish. But no written critique ever soaked your collar mid-scene. And so, despite their reputation, actors generally preferred the sharp pen to the sharp toss. What's funny, though, what no one ever seems to remember, is that the critics weren't immune to heckling themselves. More than once, a groundling's well-aimed quip would float upward. "Oi, if ye want to write your own play, go on and try it." Or, more famously, "Pardon, sir, your quill is showing." Tonight, however, they are oddly quiet. Perhaps they're distracted by the crowd's energy. Or perhaps they're waiting, ready to pounce with their little pamphlets the moment you misstep. You don't give them the chance. You re-enter for your next scene with all the confidence of a man who's dodged fruit and flirted with disaster. Your lines are crisp, your gestures fluid. You even deliver an aside with just enough self-awareness that the crowd giggles knowingly. It's a strange balance, really, playing to the critics and the crowd. The gentry want eloquence, the pit wants flair. The critics want both, and will punish you for failing at either. Which is why, when the next orange sails through the air, it's not aimed at you. It's aimed at them. You stifle a laugh as the fruit lands with a thunk near the critic's boot. He jumps, his inkwell wobbling dangerously on the edge of the balcony. The pit howls with laughter. You keep your composure, barely, and soldier on, because this too is theatre, a place where nobles squirm, apprentices roar, actors strut, and critics pray their shoes are water, a place where oranges fly, not just downstage, but upward, a place where everyone, high and low, plays their part. You exit to raucous applause and the sound of the critic brushing pulp off his cuff. You'll read his review tomorrow, but tonight, the victory is yours. Backstage, the air is thick with the scent of sweat, wax, and crushed peel, You pass Simon again, now wide-eyed and triumphant, and toss him a wink. He's leaning against a pillar, still cradling the orange he caught earlier like it's a trophy. You know that look. He's hooked. Everyone gets addicted to it eventually. The chaos, the energy, the high-wire tension of live performance mixed with the looming threat of humiliation buys citrus. You wouldn't trade it for all the quiet, clean parchment in the world. Apprentices like Simon are the lifeblood of the company. Most are barely out of childhood. Boys trained not only to memorize lines, but to fetch costumes, sweep floors, and sometimes, if they're lucky, play women's roles. Their voices haven't broken, their limbs are still awkward, but their eyes sparkle with ambition. And the pit? Oh, they love an apprentice. There's a particular mischief in the crowd when a fresh-faced Romeo steps onto the stage. They lean forward, grins wide, just waiting for a voice crack or a nervous tremble. An apprentice's first line is like a match held over dry straw. You remember your first time, the fear, the heat of the sun on your neck, the way your mouth felt stuffed with wool. And, yes, the sound of something soft and citrusy landing near your foot before you'd even spoken. You flubbed your line, the crowd jeered, you ran off stage and tripped over a bucket. For weeks they called you Clementine. But you stayed. Because once you've tasted the rush of a scene well played, of a crowd swept into silence by your words, of laughter that rises right where you want it to, there's nothing else like it. Still, apprentices have it rough. They're expected to be invisible off stage and unforgettable on it. They wear the heaviest costumes, get the worst roles, and bear the brunt of audience enthusiasm. And they get blamed for nearly everything that goes wrong. Props misplaced, cues missed, even sticky floors. Historians still argue how many apprentices a typical company employed at once. Some records suggest as few as 3 or 4. Others hint at larger rosters, particularly for companies that toured. What they all agree on is this: apprentices were indispensable and very poorly paid. That's why they sometimes had to take side work. Some sang in the streets, others ran errands for noble patrons. A few, bold ones, carved tiny caricatures of their co-actors onto orange peels and sold them to groundlings for a laugh. It's risky, but if the likeness was good and the punchline sharp, it could earn a penny, or 2. Tonight, though, Simon is flush with glory. He'll dine on bread and meat tonight, not just stew. You see it in his bounce as he jogs on stage for the next group scene. The crowd claps before he even speaks. But this time, no oranges fly. Because they remember. They remember the apprentice who turned a fruit to comedy, who volleyed back their joke with charm. And in Elizabethan theater, memory is everything. It's your brand, your armor, your ghost. Simon will be fine. Until next week at least, when his voice cracks mid-sonnet and someone lobs a lemon. There's a buzz moving through the audience now, the kind of shift you feel before a storm. Not loud, but taut, electric. You peer out from behind the painted wooden pillar just in time to see the ripple of heads turning, hats adjusting, and parasols lowering. The Queen's envoy has arrived, which means tonight things are about to get very delicate. Royal representatives don't come to every performance, but when they do, the effect is immediate. The pit straightens, the gallery hushes, and somewhere a boy with 3 oranges tucked under his tunic quickly decides he no longer wants to risk a beheading. That's not an exaggeration. When Queen Elizabeth's eyes, or even the eyes of someone who reports to someone who reports to her, are upon the stage, the usual laws of theatre cease to apply. The crowd polices itself. The orange sellers disappear. The actors watch every line and every limb, terrified that one slip of tongue or splash of juice could become treason. Historians still debate whether the Queen herself ever attended open-air performances in disguise, as some legends suggest. A few tantalizing journal entries from the period describe a noble lady of high bearing, clothed plainly, yet of great interest, seated among the common folk. Was it her? We'll never know. But when the crown watches, even indirectly, everything shifts. Tonight, the stage has been quietly cleared of its usual debris. A few apprentices were sent out with mops and sawdust in the last break. The actors switched to their cleaner cloaks. Even the backdrop curtain has been turned to the side that doesn't bear last week's wine stain. And for the first time all evening, not a single orange is in sight. You step out for your next scene, one of the meatier ones, a monologue with political undertones, and the silence hits you like cold air. No whispers, no rustling. Just an attentive, poised audience, eyes gleaming in torchlight, breath held. You feel strangely exposed. It's easier in a way when they're loud, when they're heckling and laughing and hurling snack-based commentary. That's familiar. This, quiet, it's reverent, it's unnatural. You speak. Your voice feels different in the air, crisper, thinner, like it's being evaluated not just for tone or rhythm, but for loyalty. And maybe it is. After all, the wrong joke about a nobleman, the wrong wink during a speech about rebellion. Well, the Globe has hosted many performances, but it's also seen its share of arrests. Still, you press on. You know the monologue well. You've done it soaked in rain, hoarse with fever, once even while fending off a bee. You hit your marks, emphasize your vowels, gesture with gravity, and then it happens. Just as you reach the most impassioned line, an orange false, not thrown, dropped, a soft thud, barely audible over your words, as it rolls from someone's lap and lands near the foot of the stage. You freeze for half a breath. So does the audience. Then, very slowly, you step forward, you glance at the fruit, you glance at the crowd, and you say, with the ghost of a smirk, even the fruit knows when it's time to roll. The room erupts. Laughter, restrained but heartfelt, spills from every corner. Even the royal envoy smiles. The spell breaks, not in disgrace but in joy. You bow, exit. Backstage, there's a chorus of silent clapping, actors too afraid to cheer aloud in front of nobility, but beaming nonetheless. Because you did it. You brought the house down, orange and all, and with no critics harmed in the process. You retreat backstage to a strange kind of applause, polite, precise, and a bit too measured to be comfortable. It's like the crowd still trying to remember whether they're meant to be royal subjects or rowdy spectators. But you're glowing. There's a spark that lives in those moments, rare and fleeting, when theater slips its leash, when a mistake or a fruit doesn't break the performance, but elevates it. You just rode that wave, and every actor around you knows it. You barely have time to sit before the stage manager hisses your name. Next scene. Different theater now. No more politics or poets. This one's comedy. You slip on a padded belly and a ridiculous hat shaped like a chicken. The crowd roars the moment you waddle back on stage. This is your turf now. The fruit flies less often here, not because they're kinder, but because they're laughing too hard to aim. You milk the physical comedy, bellow lines with exaggerated accents, and throw in a dance move that hasn't been rehearsed since the plague year, and it works. You toss a fake goblet into the wings, fling open a prop window, and deliver the line they've all been waiting for. I may be full of beans, but I've dodged far worse. A voice from the pit calls back, "Aye, citrus!" The crowd explodes. There's no doubt. The audience remembers the oranges. They always do. It's become a theater-wide in-joke, an unspoken pact between stage and yard. It doesn't matter if it's tragedy, comedy, or history. At some point, someone's going to reference the flying fruit, and when they do, the crowd eats it up, figuratively and occasionally literally. That's how it spreads. Not just oranges, but the idea of them, the stories about them, the memory of when a show went just slightly sideways and became unforgettable. You once heard an old actor say, "You're not truly seasoned until you've taken an orange to the head and kept your monologue intact." You believed him. You still do. Historians still argue whether the presence of such audience interactivity shaped the structure of plays themselves. Were soliloquies written with pauses to allow for crowd noise? Were jokes intentionally timed to invite response? There's no unanimous answer, but if you've ever stood on that stage, you'd bet yes. You certainly adjust your pacing now, a longer breath between lines, a wary eye toward the pit during tender moments, a readiness in your stance, just in case a wayward fruit needs to be caught or sidestepped without breaking character. It's a dance, this. A slow, unpredictable choreography between actor and audience, between what was rehearsed and what happens, and sometimes the crowd gives as good as it throws. Tonight, after the final joke, you feign slipping on an imaginary orange peel. Your knees buckle, your arms windmill, and you crumple to the floor in exaggerated defeat. Laughter erupts. Someone from the second row tosses an actual orange, not at you, but to you. You catch it, kiss it, toss it behind you like a bouquet. Even the critics in the balcony clap. Backstage, you're greeted like a victorious gladiator. The apprentices cheer, Marjorie rolls her eyes but smiles. Simon holds up an imaginary scoreboard. Oranges dodged, 4. You give a mock bow and collapse into a chair, breathless, euphoric, and slightly sticky. You don't just act in this theater, you survive it. And tonight you've won. The theater begins to exhale. You feel it in the creak of benches, the muffled yawns of nobles shifting in their seats, the rustle of skirts and the scrape of wooden tankards being set down. It's the slow, inevitable settling of a crowd preparing for the final act, sated, softened, maybe even a little sleepy. But you're not done yet. There's one more scene to go. A dramatic finale, the kind of speech that sends shivers, wins encores, and, if you play it right, leaves even the orange throwers too moved to aim. You tighten the laces on your doublet, now slightly puckered from drying citrus, and head to your final cue. The stagehands give you nods, pats, muttered "don't slip this time," and other such wisdoms. The wind outside picks up, and the flames in the wall sconces flicker, throwing shadows across the wings. You wait in that quiet liminal space between laughter and silence. Then it's time. You step forward into the light, and the theater holds its breath. This monologue, this moment, isn't about jokes or pratfalls or fruit. It's about betrayal. about loyalty, about the quiet tragedy of a man who gave everything to his kingdom and was forgotten. Heavy stuff. You let your voice drop an octave, you stretch each syllable like thread, and the pit, miracle of miracles, stays silent. No shouts, no jokes, just eyes wide and watching. Even the groundlings seem taller somehow, as if drawn upward by your tone. You pace slowly across the stage, carefully. The earlier pulp has been mopped, but your boots still squeak faintly on the wood. You use it. You let the squeak punctuate the monologue, the rhythm of betrayal and grief, marked by the ghosts of earlier laughter. Then comes the final line. You turn, gaze into the gloom beyond the torchlight, and deliver it. Let history forget my name, but not my truth. A beat, a pause, and then, from the very back of the pit, someone tosses an orange. Not at you. It arcs high, slow, graceful, almost reverent, and lands at the edge of the stage. A gentle offering. And you do something no script ever wrote. You bend, pick it up, hold it in the firelight. You nod. The applause comes like rain. Building, sudden, overwhelming. You take your bow, orange in hand, and for once, there's no jeering, no laughter, just clapping. Backstage, it's chaos again. Everyone's buzzing about the arc of that last fruit. Some say it was symbolic. Others swear it was just a leftover from earlier and someone got bored. No one can agree. Historians still argue about whether these quiet rituals, fruit at the finale, laughter at tragedy, applause at the wrong time, were signs of disrespect or devotion. Some believe Elizabethan audiences were incapable of subtlety. Others say they were just as nuanced as any modern crowd, only less bound by silence. You believe the second camp. The theater wasn't a church. It was a conversation. A messy, living, orange-scented conversation between stage and pit, actor and butcher, jester and judge. And tonight, that conversation felt like music. You step outside into the cool evening air, the orange still warm in your hand, and smile. The theater empties slowly, like sand from a cracked hourglass. You stand just beyond the rear curtain, listening to the fading chorus of footsteps. Boots on planks, heels on gravel, the occasional squeal from a vendor wheeling away their half-sold wares. The warm weight of the orange still sits in your palm, now sticky, fragrant, slightly dented from its arc through the night. Someone taps your shoulder. It's Agnes, one of the sharpest of the orange sellers. She grins, tilts her basket and says, "You know, they're not meant to be trophies." You shrug. Depends how well they're thrown. She laughs, then mutters something about starting a Hall of Fame wall before disappearing into the dark. You trail slowly toward the dressing room, a term used generously to describe a curtained-off alcove with 2 mirrors and a broken comb. Other actors shuffle around you, shedding cloaks, unlacing boots, peeling away the layers of character and sweat. The air smells of grease paint and oranges and cheap soap. You sink onto a stool, set the orange down, and start unlacing your doublet. Simon bursts in moments later, beaming. "Did you see how they clapped? They never clap like that for me. I mean, for us. But still, for me." You nod, too tired to answer properly. He talks on, describing the expression on the envoy's face. The ripple of laughter 3 lines into Act 3. The apprentice backstage who tripped over a sword and accidentally invented a new blocking move. You let it wash over you like warm water. The theater's never quiet, even when it's empty. There's always chatter, clatter, the echo of lines still hanging in the rafters. But then, a thought settles on your shoulders, heavier than any cloak. Tomorrow night, there's another performance, another script, another crowd, another round of dodging, dancing, deflecting, another chance to win or lose the room with just your voice, or maybe with the way you duck. You glance at the orange. The truth is, you never know what kind of fruit the night will bring. Sometimes it's applause, sometimes it's juice, sometimes it's both. And each time you step on that stage, you carry with you the memory of every scene before, the sticky stains, the split-second choices, the way the audience turned cruel or kind depending on your stance, your stutter, your sigh. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors were more like artists or athletes, trained for poetic delivery or physical resilience. But every sore muscle in your body says both. Marjorie enters next, exhausted and somehow still immaculate. She flops onto the bench beside you, brushes a fleck of orange rind from her collar, and sighs. "They didn't throw anything at me tonight," she mutters, half disappointed. "You're just too good." "Or too fast," she replies, deadpan. The two of you sit like that for a while, quiet, content, waiting for the oil lamps to be snuffed one by one. And then someone calls from the doorway, "Pub?" A chorus of groans, then assent. Tankards are always the last act of any evening. You rise, stretch your back and leave the orange behind. Well, almost. You grab it just before stepping out, tuck it into your cloak pocket. Not as a snack, as a souvenir. Because in this strange world of powdered wigs and muddy boots, of epic lines and unexpected missiles, of nobles in the balcony and butchers in the pit, every orange tells a story. And tonight's? Yours to keep. The tavern is a 5-minute walk from the theater, though it takes longer tonight. The streets are still lively, merchants packing carts, children darting between puddles, and performers pausing every few feet to reenact some moment from the show, as if laughter were currency and they'd gone suddenly rich. You and your fellow players arrive as a slow-moving, half-costumed procession. Some still wear grease paint. One still wears his hat shaped like a roast goose. A few patrons inside cheer as you push open the door, recognizing your faces from just an hour ago. The smell hits you first. Warm ale, wood smoke, mutton stew, and a whiff of something scorched that's probably still on the menu. You sit. Tankards arrive. The noise settles around you like a blanket. It's here, in the thick clamor of the tavern, that the real performances begin. Each actor retells the night from their point of view, exaggerating a line, boasting about a laugh, dramatically reenacting every dodge, slip, and surprise orange toss with increasing flair. Simon, of course, is in full swing. "And then," he cries, standing on a bench for effect, "I caught it, looked them in the eye and bowed, like I meant it." Laughter roars. You raise your tankard to him, mouth full of stew, and he returns the toast with the unflinching sincerity of a newly minted stage veteran. Even Marjorie gives him a little clap, though it might have been sarcasm. It's hard to tell with her. The orange is still in your cloak. You haven't mentioned it. Somehow it feels sacred now, a strange little talisman of the night's magic. And yet, as you sip your ale and glance around at the familiar, weary, juice-splattered faces, you know something else. No two nights are ever the same. Tonight, it was comedy. Lightness. Even the critic laughed. once. But tomorrow, it could be tragedy, or worse, boredom. That's the thing about Elizabethan theatre. It's never just the script. It's the crowd, the smells, the sky, the ale level in the pit. The apprentice's voice cracks. The orange seller's pitch. The orange seller's pitch. The sudden rain, the heckle that lands better than your punchline. The way a monologue dies or soars, depending on which way the wind is blowing that day. Historians still argue whether Shakespeare wrote for immortality or just to pay the bills. But here, in this crowded tavern, full of hoarse voices and half-eaten pies, the answer feels simple. He wrote for this, for these nights, for these people, for actors like you. You glance out the tavern window. The street lamp flickers. The theater's silhouette looms faint in the fog, just visible beyond the rooftops. Tomorrow you'll go back. You always do, because the play needs playing. And you need the risk, the fruit, the laughter, the endless dance with chaos, and maybe, just maybe, the hope that the next orange isn't a weapon at all, but a round little sign that someone somewhere in the crowd is watching. A fire in the tavern has burned low, and the once rowdy room has mellowed to a gentle hum. Tankards are half empty, feet are propped on benches, and a few apprentices are asleep at the table, their arms cradling empty bowls. You're still awake, though, still wired. You roll the orange between your palms slowly, feeling the slight give of its skin. It's cooled now, no longer warm from the stage lights or the press of your hand, but it still holds something. Not magic exactly, but memory. You think back to earlier seasons, to the players who came before you, old Kit, who used to wear a hardened leather doublet to protect against low-flying apples, Mad Ellen, who made a game of catching fruit in her skirts and flinging it right back, earning a reputation as both a jester and a menace. They're gone now, retired or moved on to courtier plays or the touring companies that brave the provinces, but their stories linger backstage, like the chalk marks on the floor no one ever scrubs away. And then there are the ghosts. Every theater has them, not spirits necessarily, but echoes. You feel them when you wait in the wings, when the air grows still before your entrance, when the silence of a waiting crowd presses against your chest, the echo of laughter, of missteps, of triumphs and disasters, so vivid they cling to the boards. You once performed the same monologue 2 nights in a row, same words, same blocking, same intonation, and got applause the first night, silence the second. Why? You'll never know. The crowd shifts like sand. You can't tame it, you can only read it. That's what separates a good actor from a great one. Not diction, not posture. Reading the room, reading the pit, reading the moment before someone throws something. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors were treated more like celebrities or servants. The truth? Both. One day you're invited to a noble's banquet to recite lines from Julius Caesar. The next you're dodging ale cups hurled in a drunken misunderstanding of Macbeth. But every time you think of quitting, of becoming a tailor, a scribe, a printer's boy, you remember the glow of a torchlit stage, the heat on your skin when the lines land just right, the silence that hangs in the air when the crowd is listening with their whole selves, the hush before applause, the hush after. And yes, even the orange. You place it carefully on the table, where it gleams under the low firelight. Simon stirs beside you, mutters something about dream oranges, and falls back asleep. You smile. The night is winding down, and the tavern keeper is eyeing the room like a man preparing for war with a broom. It's time to leave. You rise, cloak slung over your shoulder, orange tucked once more into your hand. You step outside. The street is slick with dew, quiet but not dead. The faint sound of distant lute music drifts through an open window. A cat darts past your feet, startled by your shadow. Annette, just beyond the curve of the lane, the globe sits like a sleeping beast, dark, silent, waiting. You'll be there again tomorrow. Boots cleaned, lines memorized, head held high, because there are more scenes to play, more oranges to dodge, and more moments to earn. Morning comes far too soon. You're woken not by a rooster, but by the slap of boots in the corridor and the rattle of someone knocking on every door in the actor's lodging house. A gruff voice follows. Rehearsal, 10 minutes. You groan. You know your legs ache, your back's stiff. There's a rind imprint on your palm where you must have fallen asleep, still gripping the orange. You didn't mean to keep it with you through the night, but something about it stuck. You toss on a tunic, splash your face with water that feels like it was drawn from the Thames, and shuffle down the stairs. Back at the theater, the world looks different by daylight. The pit is empty now, just dirt and scraps. The benches are crooked. The stage looks smaller, less magical. The candlelight's gone, and so is the crowd's heat. What's left is the skeleton of something beautiful. A bare wooden frame held together by rope, spit, and sheer conviction. This is when the real work begins. No one throws oranges during rehearsal. They just throw words. Faster, says the director. You're dragging like a corpse. Slower, he barks 2 minutes later. It's a lament, not a market sale. You and your castmates rehearse, reset, rehearse again. You mark positions with chalk. You recite until the syllables melt in your mouth. There's no applause, no laughter, no danger, just repetition. But even in this calm, the echoes of last night cling to the stage. Every sticky plank you step over reminds you of something. The quip that landed, the near slip you disguised as a bow, the sudden silence before your last line. And there's something else too. The orange. You left it by your script this morning, half forgotten in the folds of your cloak. Now it sits on a stool by the back curtain, and everyone seems to nod at it when they pass, as if it's earned a place in the company. Simon walks by and says it should get billing. Marjorie adds, only if it learns to project. The laughter's quiet, but real. That's the thing about the theater. The jokes linger, they build. One orange toss becomes legend, becomes lore, becomes a ritual. You've heard whispers that in some troupes, actors rub an orange on their boots before a premiere, for luck, or maybe for traction. Historians still argue whether the theater of the time was a sacred space or a glorified barn, but standing here now, brushing dust off your sleeves and rehearsing lines for a story no one's yet heard, it feels like both. The final scene in tonight's play is a wedding. You'll be back in full costume, speaking verses about love and fidelity, while secretly eyeing the pit for potential peel hurlers. Your timing must be perfect. Your rough must be crisp. And if something flies, you'll catch it. Or not. You'll dance with it either way. The rehearsal ends with a sluggish bow and scattered applause among the cast. You linger behind, tracing one last blocking mark with your toe, and glance again at the orange. Maybe you'll bring it on stage tonight, not to throw, to hold, to remember, to remind yourself what it means to perform where nothing is certain except the love of the craft and the chance to be hit in the face with citrus at any moment. Because this is what you do. This is who you are. You are an actor. You are a survivor. And you are juice-stained, sleep-deprived, slightly bruised, the luckiest fool alive. And now, as the theater fades into night and the torches gutter low, let yourself drift away from the laughter, from the shouts, from the sticky planks and creaking trapdoors. Imagine the Globe Theatre now, empty, silent, its benches cooling in the breeze. No oranges in flight, no scripts in hand, just the hush of a space waiting for the next breath, the next line, the next heartbeat of a story. The stage is bare, the curtains drawn. The crowd has gone home. The apprentices tucked into corners like curled pages of a forgotten script. Even the ghosts sleep now, curled in the rafters, whispering soft memories of lines that once brought down the house. Let the noise recede. Let the candlelight dim behind your eyes. You are no longer in costume, no longer watched, no longer waiting for the next cue. You are simply still. The night air is cool against your skin, the floor beneath your feet solid and sure. Somewhere nearby, a dropped orange rolls gently against a wooden beam. It does not burst. It does not stain. It simply rests. So do you. You've walked the boards, you've faced the crowd, and now it's time to let the curtain fall. Take a long breath, a soft one. You've earned it.